temperatures, and it kind of shows how it can vary quite a bit.
Well, I think it shows how it's becoming more and more unpredictable. We're having more and more impacts of climate change, of the climate crisis that are really palpable, like, on a day-in, day-out basis.
It's been astonishing to watch the fires up in British Columbia in particular. Places that normally would be very, very damp, and a fire might pop out from time to time, just consuming communities up there. What's been kind of your thought too as you watch some of that? Is it worrisome to see communities? I mean, I think of Kelowna as not dissimilar in size, a little more developed than Missoula, but not dissimilar in size. You see those things, does it worry you a little bit?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's devastating to see, glaciers collapsing in Alaska, or wildfires in Hawaii, I mean, there's so many things that are happening that are really alarming and abnormal. And you look at our winters becoming less predictable. We have these different freeze-thaw cycles, and our wildfire smoke, and climate anxiety. I mean, every parent I talk to has their kids, not just kids, climate anxiety throughout our community about what does our future look like. And I think that's, I think it is really alarming. People are uneasy, and I think our world is a challenging place right now in a lot of ways. Economic inequality, housing instability, there's political uncertainty, war in Ukraine. There's all these different factors that cause us anxiety, and I think the climate is a major piece of that. And something that we really, the science is there, that we need to get a handle on this very quickly, and we need to, we don't have time to mess around.
And we saw with, of course, the quite high-profile lawsuit, with the kids and the teens. It shows that anxiety and those concerns are definitely trickling down generations that are right behind us. They're concerned about the future.
Yeah. Well, I think that the Held versus Montana trial is a great example of something that is a bright spot. Our Constitution, our 1972 Constitution, guarantees a clean, healthful environment, and that trial was really about whether or not that was being provided to the plaintiffs, and the judge's ruling, Judge Seeley, was that it wasn't, and that it isn't, and so that, I think, really provides an interesting path to to navigate the challenging legal environment. So and that'll surely be appealed, and there will be lots of iterations of that, but I think that'll be of national significance moving forward.
So let's talk about what Missoula's doing. And the interesting thing I think about all the climate change debate, it's been interesting in my interviews with Dr. Steve Running. Dr. Running, we talk about, sometimes you think, oh, it's this big global thing, what can I do to make a difference? And really this climate action strategies and this 050 we're going to talk about tonight really is, I guess, what the city's attempt to set some community, street level type things that we can do to do our part, right?
Yeah. Well, the reality is that cities around the world are leading on climate change, and Missoula is no different. So there are, there are global needs. There are needs at the national scale and the global scale in terms of emissions reduction and in terms of innovation, and those needs have historically not been met at a I'd go so far as to say that other levels of government are abdicating their responsibility. And so what cities are doing is really leading and pushing on climate. And I think that's some of what's exciting around the work in Missoula and in other communities around the West.
And it's kind of mirroring what we see going on globally. I mean, in Europe in particular, other countries doing different climate accords, different things, from recycling on up. So this is sort of is really, how do we take that and make it our own and adopt some policies very specific to us, right?
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of, so we have our strategic plan has 3 lenses, and those are really, you could view those as, with your glasses, you've got a framework that holds up your lenses, and the lenses help you focus on what you're looking at. And our lenses in our strategic plan are around climate, equity, and housing. And so what you can really think of that as is that every decision we make is weighed through those lenses. Now, you may not make the best decision from a housing standpoint, or from a climate standpoint, or from a financial standpoint, but you are walking in with eyes wide open, and that is one of the goals of the climate lens. So when we buy, and the long-term goal is that we're able to benchmark things that are happening around the city and really evaluate their climate impact. So, if right now it's impossible really to compare emulsified asphalt with municipal court software. But this lens will give us a framework to be able to evaluate municipal decisions and to be able to make sure that we're making decisions with climate in mind at the local level within city government.
So let's talk about a little bit about the history of how we got to this point, and then we'll dive into some of the details. And I know a lot of this, I think the 050 discussion, some of those things were kind of starting even prior to the pandemic, as I recall. But we went through this, 2 years or so, almost 3 years of sort of just coping. Tell me a little bit about the history of this and what was some of the interest in the council initially to kind of move in these directions?
Well, so council, before I was on the council, so pre-2014, there were climate initiatives, there were climate goals, there were greenhouse gas inventories. There's an internal climate and energy team that works on what it sounds like, I guess. And so that work's been going on for a while, but the climate lens really is looking at institutionalizing what we call our Big Four plans. So we have our carbon neutrality goals as a city, and I say capital C city as an organization and as a community. We have our 100% clean electricity goals, and that is 100% clean electricity by 2030. We have our Climate Ready Missoula Resiliency Plan, and that is really about becoming a resilient community that is resilient in the face of the impacts of the climate crisis. And then our zero waste plan. And the zero waste plan is about our waste stream and how we manage our waste stream. And that covers really everything that goes to the landfill and beyond.
Now tell me a little bit about, so with these four elements, these four tent poles, if you will, that hold this up, what has already happened? I mean, a lot of this looks over the horizon and wants to get us to goals, in the next 20 to 30 years. But what's been done recently in terms of these four specific areas?
Yeah, and we could spend a lot of time on each of those, and I think maybe I'd start with what. So those four plans are kind of our overarching climate policy as a city, and a lot of the work that we're doing now is about institutionalizing that work so that it really is infused throughout the organization. So. The climate lens is about, again, like taking all of those pieces, all of those climate policies and making sure that we're applying them to all of the decisions. We have 100 roughly adopted plans and policies within the city, and those range from things like our urban forest plan to our master fire department plan to neighborhood plans, or there's a wide range of different types of plans, and they all have a particular constituency, and they all have a particular purpose. And what our strategic plan does is it knits everything together in one, it synthesizes all those plans into a prioritized document. So we have, in these 100 and some adopted plans and policies, we have, thousands of individuals throughout our community who have commented and have weighed in and have, put their fingerprint on, whether it's the growth policy or the Parks, Recreation, Open Space and Trails plan. And what the strategic plan attempts to do is to knit all of those together so that we can say, if something in stormwater is in conflict with something in urban forestry, how are we adjudicating that conflict? And so what the strategic plan does is it directs us to do that with climate in mind, with housing in mind, with equity in mind. And so that's really the work about institutionalizing this. We've got all these plans. How do we work together to make them happen with beneficial end results for climate?
And so we're talking about, let me get a little scope on this. So it could be something as small as what kind of batteries is the police department buying to put in their radios, all the way up to what is the trails plan citywide? What's our transportation plan?
Yeah, and so procurement's a big part of it. So if we're buying goods and services, what is the climate impact of those goods and services? And so something like supplies, that definitely has a component. We don't want to reinvent the wheel and be evaluating, okay, this is this paper is better than this paper, but what we do want to do is we want to have a framework for making those decisions in procurement at the small scale and at the large scale. So procurement's one of them, but also how we go about our buildings. So we have a sustainable building policy that is how we treat what we do for our municipal buildings to make sure that they're meeting our goals. We have a vehicle purchasing policy. So all these internal policies are really affected by the climate lens. And I think with a lot of things, with climate and equity in particular, we have to make sure our house is in order as our very first order of business. Make sure that what we're doing from a municipal standpoint is meeting our collective goals. And then another piece of that is outward facing work in the community. But we've got a lot of internal work to do. That's a priority.
And I think of one thing in particular, one example of that is lighting. And I'm gonna pick on that just for a second as a total rookie when it comes to this stuff. But one of the things is I think is just amazing is to watch the retrofitting or new construction and how LED lighting has become such a feature. Mm-hmm. I had a chance, I was touring the new school down in Lolo, and it's amazing to look at the complexity of that system and how it manages their energy consumption. So I'm thinking in the city's case, we've got older buildings, or new space, older spaces that may be retrofitted, all the way up to eventually doing some things over with the federal building. So that's an example, I would think, of how do we then apply that, the equity, the money that we're spending, right, the energy costs, and also that climate lens, looking at what does that do in the bigger picture, right?
Yeah, and I think so. A lot of what we've done is retro commissioning or performance contracting in our buildings in particular. And so we've worked with a vendor who comes in and does an assessment and makes sure that things are tuned up like they ought to be. It's not uncommon in an old building to have in City Hall in particular where mechanical systems are old and failing, and you may have one room being heated while simultaneously the room next door is being cooled. And so a lot of that work on the building front is tuning up systems and replacing lighting, replacing mechanical systems. But then there's much more visionary stuff that we need to do too. So we are working on, or we had an EPA technical assistance grant to look at ground source heating and cooling at a district scale. So this was based on the Montana Rail Link Park area. There's 8.1 acres over there that are set for redevelopment, and we did an analysis with EPA funds to look at could we do district scale, utility scale heating and cooling with geothermal, and that was and that looked at how many units, what would the density be, what would it take for this to really make sense, and to basically create a new utility where we're providing heating and cooling as a municipal service through groundwater or through that ground source resource. So it's things like that where we can innovate and lead out into the community and provide a path for the rest of the community.
And I would imagine updating must be a big part of this, because it's not like, look, energy efficiency has been around for, I don't know, 40 years at least in municipalities and those kind of things, always looking at primarily how to save. I mean, ever since the energy crunch and, the energy crisis in '73, everybody's looked at that. Mm-hmm. So I would imagine part of it is also then updating the approach that you're taking to newer tech, mm-hmm. newer science, newer concepts, right? Yeah. So you may take a system, whether it's an HVAC system, whether it's how the patrol cars are running, whatever it is, and then assess that against a more visionary look that's more 2023 and decades to come, right?
Yeah, and I think a couple of things have changed, and one is it is becoming, oftentimes now there is a climate-friendly solution that is the best solution that is also a cheaper solution than what we're doing now. So we just installed the second largest solar array in Montana, the largest non-export and the largest in western Montana at our wastewater treatment plant. This is powering 25% of the wastewater, of the electricity needs of the wastewater plant. And It is, again, it's the second largest solar array in the state, so it's not trivial in size. And we're saving money on day one with that. So we have a power purchase agreement through a third-party provider who is taking advantage. They own the panels and they sell the power to us. That means that they're able to take advantage of private tax credits, of tax credits available for solar power, and then translate that into a savings for us. And especially with Northwestern's rate case right now, where electric rates are poised to jump pretty significantly, we're saving money, and we have a significantly diminished carbon footprint at the wastewater plant. Now we still have that 75% gap to close, but it's a good start. Now, so that's one thing, is that a lot of the technology is changing to the point where it just makes sense. The other piece is the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, which is the most monumental climate legislation in U.S. history, and provides billions of dollars of funding for really transforming our economy. And that's something that, transforming our energy economy, transforming so many aspects of how we power our society. And that's a great opportunity. What that did was it took those tax credits with that, that kind of clunky power purchase agreement, and it took that and it made those available as direct rebates to municipalities. So we're able to invest in energy in a way that we've never been able to, and that's a real game changer for cities. So I think that's a really exciting change.
Is there also an interest in sort of learning as you go here? So for example, let's say you put those solar panels in, they're up and operating at the wastewater plant. Are there some lessons that you may learn that then as you're doing retrofitting somewhere else, you say, oh, we learned this about solar, or we learned this about a way to approach it or to use a vendor? Is that also part of it, that we're fairly early in these kinds of concepts? And we can learn and go.
And we learn from everything we do. And I think that's one of the things that's great about the city, is this culture of innovating and iterating and improving. But I mean, the other thing too is that this is not fringe anymore. This is, I mean, it's not, these are developed technologies that make sense. And we're not early adopters of solar. We're actually, we have been in the past, but we need to turn up the dial and do this very quickly. And so we've learned a lot from the wastewater plant. We've learned a lot, but that was informed by, we put solar on the parking garage downtown.
Yeah, I remember that. Prior. That's why I was asking about that. Yeah.
And we learned a lot from that, and that is scaled. That's at a smaller scale, and that's a particularly annoying nuance in state law, that's as big as it can be for the type of setup that it is. But we learned a lot from that, and we continue to apply that to new systems and to new approaches.
I just this is a side, you have to comment on this. I was just sitting here thinking about technologies and how they arrived. We've always complained that Missoula was located. Why did they build in Hellgate Canyon? It's the windiest place in the world. I'm thinking, well, that might be to our benefit down the road. We might be able to use that. Let's talk about a couple of things specifically. So the Electrify Missoula outreach. And let's talk about how that works, and especially how the outreach portion of something like that. Give us an example of how that
so
works.
We have Lee Ratterman is one of our climate program staff. She's our sustainability and climate specialist, and she's been really involved in that. We also have Amy Sillenberg from Climate Smart Missoula here, and it's a really good partnership, and I think it'd be a great time to.
Let's talk to Lee. Where's Lee out here? Oh, there she is, right in front. Yeah, let's talk about that. Outreach is a huge part, because, we always say education is a part of anything that's a climate initiative or getting people to, be energy smart. Talk a little bit about how that sort of functions.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, thank you. So as we've been hearing from Mayor Hess, we have a lot of initiatives. We are trying to accomplish a lot at the city, and we have 2 full-time staff members kind of tasked with working on those initiatives. We have the support, obviously, of our mayor, lots of our leadership and staff members throughout the city, but ultimately it falls onto us. And so as Mayor Hess mentioned, we rely really heavily on our community partners to help us with public-facing outreach. As of now, just because we're lacking capacity. And we work really closely and collaboratively to design programs such as Electrify Missoula. And then we really, to this point, have relied heavily on Climate Smart Missoula to help with the community outreach and sharing information about what community members can do as we are trying to work kind of behind the scenes to create the policies and the programs to implement those.
Is a lot of that answering those questions? So, for example, if somebody sees the solar installation at wastewater, or they see something else going on, so that they're educated and they may learn from that and say, oh, not only support that, but what can I do in my own little sphere, whether I own a business or a home? Is that also part of that long-range education?
Absolutely, yeah, and we try at the city level to help educate as much as we can. We have a updated website, but we hear from Climate Smart Missoula all the time that they get calls almost daily from residents wondering what's going on, what can they do, what is the city doing, what's the county doing, and so yeah, again, it's a very collaborative and partnership-based effort that we rely heavily on them for the outreach piece.
With just a couple of staff members, I'm sure there's more than you probably like to do everything. How's that priority, and what kind of discussions go behind setting priorities and sort of moving in some of these programmatic areas?
Yeah, we try on a yearly basis to do a work plan. One of the things we say as we're doing our work planning is that we have to be very competent in pivoting on a day-to-day basis, because you just don't know what's going to come up. I mean, all of a sudden this year there's all of this Inflation Reduction Act funding that we didn't anticipate last year when we were making our work plan. And so now we're pivoting and we're figuring out how can we best use those dollars within our community to make the most change. But we have support citywide from our leadership, from our mayor, from top level staff, and we really work closely and have great lines of communication to do those prioritizing pieces.
You always get that curveball from Washington, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's and what about so as people watch this, and we'll talk to Amy in a second, but when we talk about people getting involved and sort of taking ownership, if you will, of what some of these city programs are, how important is the outreach to be able to get that so people kind of getting these concepts and learning to apply them?
Yeah, I would say it's the most important activity we can do. We can work internally at the city to make policies for the way that we act and do things as a model for the rest of the community. But really, the community needs to know what can they do, how can they do it, how can they take advantage of money that's out there to accomplish the goals that we're all trying to achieve.
Thank you very much. Where's Amy at? Come on up front here, Amy, so I can get you on the camera here. And we'll talk about, and Climate Smart, you guys have done some amazing work, quietly in the background. And how's it been? How's it, first off, let's talk about the excitement level to see this type of a more comprehensive community-wide approach. How important is that to making real progress?
Oh, it's huge. Like, climate change obviously affects all of us, and all of us need to play some role and do something. We can't all do it all. We can all do something. So what we've just seen is more and more interest in from residents and businesses, and all around the community, of saying, how can I be a part of this? And so, as Lee was just speaking of with this Electrify program, the Inflation Reduction Act has provided some, basically an opportunity to accelerate that, whether it's solar panels on your home or your business, or whether it's looking at new appliances and making the switch from a fossil fuel-based, heating and cooling system, or to electrify, induction stove or heat pump water heater that we've got a rebate program the city and the county do. So it's those things where people are like, wow, I could potentially make a switch and do something that will be part of the climate solutions, because we need everybody. So that's been why there's such a great partnership with the city and the county too. We're all in this together. And then there's a lot of other nonprofits and other folks working on it too. So we definitely don't take all the credit for that. But it's kind of an exciting time. I think it's also, one step, because there's a lot of things for homeowners coming down the pike, but they're not for renters, or there's limited opportunities if you're a renter, and we have a lot of renters. So there's so much opportunity right now, and I think real excitement in marrying some of this energy efficiency, electrification, and the built environment with some of our affordable housing issues, and trying to piece some of those together and hopefully find some outside funding to do that. And that's what we're all
It's
putting our heads
almost like
together.
a climate Tetris, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And we're trying to think, what can we do now, and what could we do in the future to help multi-solve in some of those issues. So.
How's the momentum? I just feel like we've heard about a lot of alternative energy. I'll just take that as one. We've heard about that for a long time. Public transportation for a long time. Do you feel like we're kind of entering a new era to get that kind of attention from individuals or business owners? People sort of taking ownership and increased interest?
I hope so. I mean, we're always have the glass half full when you work on climate, or you wouldn't be in this field. So I think we're definitely feeling it. I mean, this summer has been stark. We've gotten folks calling us like, I have to do something. Help me figure out what to do, because people are seeing it around them. Whether it's, I mean, we've been in a beautiful bubble here in Missoula for the most part. It hasn't been too hot, it hasn't been too smoky for the most part. But people look around and it's like, oh wow. I mean, the fact that we got rain to put out our fires from a hurricane, and so, like, this is weird, right? So I hope that the momentum is building. I think that it is, but there's a lot of folks that we haven't reached yet, and a lot of folks too that, you know, maybe their priority is getting their kids to school, figuring out daycare, and we have to make it as easy as we can, because a lot of people don't have the capacity to, you know, to think about what their next steps are to solve a climate crisis. So we got to make it easy for them, and we've got to make it affordable, and we've got to bring everybody in.
That's what I was going to ask you.
Fast.
Especially with the inflationary pressures now, is part of that, big part of that message now is helping people understand the affordability of taking these steps.
Yeah, sure. But, you know, it's understanding that. And for folks that have the means, like, there's a lot of things they can do. And it's going to have a great payback, getting solar panels, or maybe even figuring out, switching out your appliances. For folks that don't, we've got to figure out how to help them be part of it, so that the folks that are for the hardest time, you know, turning on an air conditioner and paying those electric bills, and or you know, paying for their utility bills, how they have an easier time going forward. And that is going to take a lot. It's going to take work here in Missoula, but it's going to need state help, and it's going to need federal help, and we've got to be all in this together. So it really depends on all of us kind of rowing in the same direction in the same boat. But
Perfect. Thank you, Amy. Appreciate it very much. Yeah, it's interesting. If you want to see an interesting YouTube video, a fellow by the name of Marcus Brownlee does all kinds of, reporting and stuff. He has millions of followers on YouTube. And it was fascinating to watch. I watched a clip of the other day. It was talking about what it took him to electrify his home, you know, with solar and everything like that. And like Amy said, he was saving money, but it cost him about $100,000 worth of investment in his home to get there. So, but isn't that where economy of scale makes a big difference, though, for an organization like the city working with the county and these other groups?
It does, and there's also this tension for me around personal responsibility and government responsibility, and I think and corporate responsibility is actually probably a bigger piece of that. So you know, the original, there's all these greenhouse gas calculators out there, and I heard this on NPR over the weekend, and the first greenhouse gas calculator came about by BP, British Petroleum, and they put that out there as a tool to shift. It was a blame shifting tool. It was a tool to shift. You know, your carbon footprint is your fault. It's not a systemic fault of how we get our energy. And I think that that's something that's really important as we think about equity. Where, you know, I think about my college apartment over on 4th Street by the old Missoulian building, and you know, the windows were, you know, you'd scrape the ice off the inside of the window in the winter, and, you know, an old gas stove and old gas furnace that was, you know, floor furnace that was probably not very safe and not very effective or efficient, and I think about the equity impact of how are we doing housing so that climate's a social justice and an economic justice issue, and environmental justice issue, and it's something where as we develop housing, we need to make sure we're doing it in a way where everyone in our community has access to these resources. So we need to make sure that as we're developing income qualified housing, that we're electrifying it. We need to make sure that these programs that Amy and Lee mentioned are available to renters to the extent that that's possible in the framework of the law. And then going back to that corporate responsibility piece, we need to shift the blame back. Personal responsibility is important, and it's important that we conserve, and it's important that we do the things that we need to do. But we need economic scale. We need economy scale change in terms of how we produce energy. That's not an individual responsibility. All the rooftop solar in the world isn't going to solve the systems problems. So I think that's the era that's where I think we need to really turn our attention is to that systems level change.
It's interesting to me is one day, I think it was right about when some of this was, and I remember writing a story or doing a story about it and driving through town and going back over to the television station, and here comes a train full of coal, and I thought I was struck by the sharp contrast there. We are in an interesting time, and like you say, the system has to change, individual change, but also system change.
Yeah,
right?
I live right by the rail yard, and it's kind of interesting. And not so much anymore, but there used to be a lot of wind turbine trains.
Yeah, you see those big blades going through. Yeah,
and then interspersed with coal trains, and there are policy decisions that have caused that to happen.
Yeah.
From a transportation standpoint, from a tax standpoint, from a globalization standpoint. I mean, that coal is going across the Pacific. So when it's on the trains there, so going through Missoula. So I mean, it actually is a good reminder of. And we have solar panels on our roof, and you can see you see the roof, and then you see the coal train going by, and I mean it's a reminder of the scale of change that we're up against.
And we are in a transition point. I mean, it's interesting. I remember talking with Eric Green, does all the research in the Osprey, and we were out east of town here in Hellgate Canyon and by the Nest, and sure enough, there went a coal train. He said, it's interesting because here goes the coal to China, and of course comes back as heavy metals and everything else. And it's really interesting. Let's talk about, I want to come back to the housing thing in a minute. I do want to mention that if you're watching as well, it is Wednesdays with the mayor, Mayor Jordan Hess, and we're talking about the city's climate initiatives. If you have a question you'd like to share, 406-546-7692. You can go ahead and text your questions in if you feel comfortable doing that, or call 406-546-7692 if you're watching us live on MCAT. And a big thanks to Scott and Ron and the whole crew for joining in tonight and making this possible as our hosts here at the Missoula Public Library. Let's talk about a couple of things on the list. I love these as examples of what we're talking about. Let's talk about, for example, recycling bins downtown. How does that help the climate and be a part of this whole picture?
Well, that's part of our zero by 50 plan. So that's our zero waste plan to really become a waste-free community or zero waste community by 2050. And I mean, it's about all of our waste streams. So the recycling bins downtown are an example of something that's funded by our business improvement district, and it's a way to capture, it's a way to divert materials from the landfill. And something that pretty small lift, but something that we were able to accomplish as part of that 0 by 50 plan. We have that's sort of an all of the above approach. So a major part of our waste stream is construction waste, and so we have new programs through the Missoula Redevelopment Agency to support deconstruction and reuse of building materials rather than landfilling of materials. So that's another example of a specific. And working with our third-party partner in this is Home Resource, who's a great partner in terms of the waste diversion. And we in this budget, we're able to support a few things for them in terms of waste stream tracking and things that'll really help them reduce.
I notice you've actually got a kind of a hazardous waste collection system, right? That's going in conjunction with that.
Yeah, and so that's that's kind of a maybe not a direct climate program, but more of a water quality program and just a human health and environmental health program. So there used to be, remember, there were the signs for hazardous waste days, and you could take all the junk from your garage and get rid of it.
But it was only once a year.
Yeah, and then
funding was always, trying to keep the ongoing funding was always a challenge for those efforts.
And for me, hazardous. So for me, I was either one day late or 364 days early for hazardous waste days.
Yeah.
And so the new program is, and so I probably still have stuff that I meant.
Well, because you'd run across it in January, and it wouldn't be until September, and it's like, what do I do with it in the meantime?
Yeah, and so the new collection site will be at Home Resource, and it'll be a staffed site where with specially designed containers where staff can collect and process.
But I want to talk about that, Jordan, because that is huge. And here's where I'm coming from on that. We're moving more and more into, we have our stormwater utility. We need to pay attention to stormwater, and we're kind of catching up with we've talked about this, communities on the coast where stormwater has been a huge deal. Yeah. Keeping hazardous waste out of that saves us money.
Absolutely.
Saves cleanup. I mean, I think about how much we had to spend just at Karis Park dealing with an old outfall.
Yeah.
Outfall.
Yeah, and
those
we
kind
still
of
have
things.
some of those old outfalls
Yeah.
where stormwater goes directly into the Clark Fork, and a rain like yesterday, those really big rains. That's when you get your big pollution flushing events and have the biggest water.
And you see that
quality
weird
events.
foam
Yeah.
on the
Yeah.
the road and the river, and you're
Yeah.
going, what's exactly in that? Yeah.
So we have in Caris Park, we have a I don't remember what it's called, but it's a separator basically that,
Yeah.
that separates out, and it's buried underneath. So in Caris Park and all the new improvements, there's the plaza and the where the hill used to be, and there's a bunch of stormwater infrastructure underneath all of that. And that was actually the impetus for that was water quality, and that
Yeah.
was what got us into redoing Caris Park. And there's this device in there that basically separates out sludge and
Yeah.
sediment and whatnot from oils and things that float on top of the surface and act as a significant water quality benefit for that stormwater discharge.
And that's a huge part of climate, I mean, because our river is our climate.
Well,
right?
and our river, I mean, there are, take bull trout, native bull trout in our river that are cold water species that are impacted by, that are stressed by rising water temperatures, and water quality is, a huge, a big piece of that solution. So it all ties together.
Yeah. Let's talk about business involvement. One of the things on the list I know is this Pledge Zero business program. Mm-hmm. Tell me a little bit about getting business involved, especially at a time when, costs and operating costs and labor costs have been on their minds. Mm-hmm. How do you get folks involved to do their part?
So I think it's the same as individuals, where there's times when businesses act out of with a value set in mind, and there's times when they act out of with an economics set in mind, and oftentimes with climate now, those are aligning more and more. So through our work on 100% clean electricity, we're working on trying to get businesses to sign up to do rooftop solar, or to sign up for clean electricity through a potential renewable rate option, which we can maybe talk about a little later. But those are programs that where as Lee said, it's about making it easy, it's about making it accessible, it's about a lot of our small businesses, they are in the weeds of running a business, and making providing getting rooftop solar is not necessarily front of mind, or
they may not own the building, or they may have to go through a lot of hoops to make that work. So I think what you're saying is providing the resource to help them work through those things, right, is big.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And the Pledge Zero program is more on the waste stream side, but again, it's about providing a resource to those businesses.
Yeah. Let's talk about another part of this, the wildfire smoke. I think it was Amy mentioned. We talked about, we've had one of those years. I can't believe, you look at what's happened back east with all the Canadian fire smoke, and we're probably going to get a little bit more coming in before the season's over. How does this climate policy work when it comes to those kinds of big regional things and regional impacts?
Well, and those are impacts that we're going to, that is more on the resilience and adaptation side. And so the Climate Ready Plan is really about how we adapt as a community that is changing. So we have wildfire impacts. We know we're going to have those. We know that those are human health, related issues. We know they're bad for people with asthma. I mean, it causes asthma. We know all of these things to be factually true, but we don't really have a good response for it. And so the Climate Ready Resiliency Plan is really more about creating a community that's resilient to the changing climate. So wildfire smoke is a great example where it's about equipping people to have clean indoor air at their home. So maybe there's tools to purchase filtration devices, or build. There's people even build little in-home air filters with
their own little DIY HEPA filters.
Yeah, with a box fan and a furnace filter, basically. And so there's things like that can be done or promoted through this plan. But also, things like this building. And I think I mentioned the library every time we're in it, because it's always an inspiring building. But this is this could be a place of respite in a time of wildfire smoke. And so making sure that we have those in our community. We have long-range plans for a community center at McCormick Park, which would provide opportunities for recreation and activities, but it could also be a place for clean air place of respite or vaccination clinic or things like that that might be less of a different type of civic purpose, I guess.
And it sounds like, again, that's where you're talking options with Lee and the others working those kinds of programs, because, people look at it. I know I've thought about it. The last few summers, very smoky, a lot of it regional smoke coming from California and other points west and south. And you think, well, maybe I should install, the air conditioning system. And maybe that's not the best choice. If you only have a few weeks of fire smoke, there may be a smaller, more affordable solution,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and I think that just helping guide the community through that is a lot of that work of the resiliency.
Yeah, because you don't know where where to go to get those answers,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. As we talk about, we talked about the clean air spaces and those kind of things. Let's talk about code reform and how this sort of works in our growth policy and things. How would climate policy inform something like our building codes and those kinds of nuts and bolts operational things?
Yeah, sure. So we have a couple of opportunities. One is through building code. We can have what's called a stretch code, and that is basically a code that is above and beyond. So there's the standard building code, which is adopted by the state, and then there's the stretch code, which is an energy code that is on top of that, and that can be incentive based. So if you meet this efficiency standard, for instance, you might get an incentive from the city. Maybe your building permit review is expedited or something like that. And so that's an option that exists within state law. We can't really mandate, through building code, we can't really mandate anything that's on the energy side. But I think a lot of what we can do through our long-range transportation plan and through our growth policy is encourage a built environment where people are more prone to walking. They're more prone to taking transit. They have a little corner grocery where they can walk, to and get local produce. I mean, there's a lot of things like that where we can encourage different behaviors through our growth policy and through our code.
And so for growth and development, it would be like having an elective layer. So you'd have the building codes and those standards set by law, but then you'd have this other piece that you could then operate in and encourage people or help them find resources to be able to do things that are more climate friendly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Now, this brings up the point. I want to get back to the housing question because, play devil's advocate for a minute, because people are looking out there and they're seeing, new developments. There was one approved this week, way out, get out in the Mullen Road, or it's out on Mary Jane Boulevard, or it's down south in Miller Creek, all those kinds of things. And the common person would look at that and say, well, how can we be climate friendly if we're putting hundreds of new homes, on the periphery of the city? How do you reconcile that question of the growth and development in housing versus more urban growth?
Yeah, so I mean, I would say, the Setupkin area, the Mullen area, out by between Reserve Street and the airport, it's really proximate to our downtown core. I mean, it's a couple miles away. There's some, it's a little bit. Maybe if you're trying to bike downtown, it's a little challenging, but it's that effort is to build a neighborhood that is really cohesive and compact and walkable and has neighborhood commercial and an alternative is a couple units per acre all the way to Houston. And so it's sort of when you start thinking about, we live in a pretty compact valley and we have pretty we really can develop in a way we have to develop in a way that's pretty compact, lest we just gobble up all the land that's out there on, one unit per acre.
So the idea is that these developments coming in, the city is trying to encourage condensation within those communities, right? So you have, so you wouldn't have to drive all the way across town to get a particular service or just to get a loaf of bread, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And as part of that, though, and we had a development come in this time with this expedited consideration. Does the city still have room in those new state regs for expedited, approval? Do you still have room to be able to apply something like a climate policy or electives and incentives?
Well, so the subdivision, the expedited subdivision review under state law is a new tool, and it requires a 20-day turnaround, I think, so you submit your application for subdivision, and by the time it's deemed sufficient, it has to be then approved by the governing body within 20 days, which is really fast.
That's real fast.
But there are some sideboards in there, so that is only available to subdivisions that are not seeking a variance or an exemption for anything. So the idea is that if it meets the regulations, it's kind of your run-of-the-mill urban subdivision that isn't varying from the regulations. That's where that expedited review comes into play. So it doesn't actually change the regulations. It just only applies to those to someone who's not seeking any exceptions. So it shouldn't impact the ability to apply any of our regulatory tools.
So, for example, if you had a development that was adjacent to the river or a wetland or something like that, some extenuating circumstance involves a variance or a rezone or those kind of things, you can still take the time needed to sort of analyze and apply something like these climate approach.
Yeah, for now.
Those lenses.
The legislature seems to add a new statutory timelines every session, really. But as far as subdivisions, and subdivision is the act of making, taking one parcel of land and chopping it up into multiple ownership units, and that's the piece that has the expedited component. Rezone, some of those other entitlement processes don't. But one thing that a subdivision review can do is it can look much more thoroughly at water quality or things that are impacts to because of steep hillsides or things like that. I mean, we do have a few more tools in terms of what the review criteria are.
So not a concern that we're sort of losing part of the process while throwing the baby out with the environment, the climate bathwater.
Not specifically with that one. I wouldn't say that there's very much. There's not a lot of bright spots in terms of the state, in terms of climate policy, but that one in particular didn't really impact us.
Okay, I was just wondering because that was new and it was crossed my mind because I've seen those where you have to go through and give people a chance to comment, or you have extra review that needs to be done from some environmental question or things that come up. So that's why I was wondering about. Here's one of the questions, sort of along that line, because of your background in public transit. And I was thinking about this, public transportation. Do you feel that, and this is an interesting climate question, the cost of owning a vehicle, for example, is just, the average age of a vehicle has gone up, the prices have gone up, all those things. Do you think that from a climate standpoint, this may be actually a benefit because people will have an opportunity to, maybe they veer to public transit as opposed to trying to own a car, drive a car to get all the way across Missoula to work?
When I was the transportation director at the university, we always told new students that owning a car costs more than in-state tuition. And the national statistics bear that out, that owning a car, even an old car, is $8,000 a year or something, and according to AAA, and at the time, it was more than in-state tuition, whatever, and so one of the things that I think we can do through our policies and through our land use is create an environment where maybe a 3-car household with a couple kids becomes a 2-car household because they don't need the 3rd car, or maybe someone can carpool to work a couple days a week, or you can start making choices that
remote working.
Yeah,
exactly.
And or they can take transit and I think that is there's a movement nationally to factor transportation costs to allow people to take on a little bit more housing debt if their transportation costs are low. Transportation is the second highest household cost after housing, and so there's a movement in some areas where if you're able to live near a downtown, it's going to cost you a little more, but maybe you can take on a little bit more of a mortgage because you don't have the transportation costs, and so there's some things like that are kind of speak to that as well. But then it goes back to the equity issue, where if someone's driving in from Houston or from Florence because that's where they afford to live, then there's that huge equity component as well. So it's a complicated
and there's a lot changing. That's why I asked that, because I was thinking, you take New York City for years, vehicle ownership's incredibly low, but they had a lot of yellow cabs and now a lot of Uber or whatever, a lot of subways, those things. But it thought crossed my mind when we were talking about housing development and those kinds of things to get people out of that. That's a part of it. And that's where let's talk about transportation. Let's segue into that for a minute. How is this climate policy sort of looking at things like long-range transportation and where we develop and how do we redevelop a lot of our infrastructure?
So I mean, our built environment is really a multi-generational decision. So the university district was developed well over a century ago, and it largely stands as far as there's no streetcar anymore, but it largely stands as far as the built environment, the types of structures, the street network, all of that. So
it's remarkably resilient when you think about it. It's designed all those years ago, and yet it fits, it works.
Yeah. But then you contrast that with, say, Reserve Street, where that'll also stand for a long time. That's going to be that's very expensive infrastructure. Expanding it would be very expensive. Modifying it, changing it, adapting it would be very expensive. So these land use decisions are multi-generational. And the transportation network decisions are multi-generational. And so I think that's just an important framework. We just got this $25 million grant to invest in downtown streets with Higgins Front and Main Streets. And that, again, is multi-generational, where Higgins Avenue now, when we tear up that asphalt, when that project starts, you'll find a brick and you'll find streetcar tracks underneath the
I'm waiting to
asphalt.
see that. Yeah, and I've always heard about that.
And there's basements under, there's basement vaults under sidewalks, and there's a lot of infrastructure that we'll be able to refresh through this grant. And so I think that's I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I think that's kind of the aspect of our long-range transportation planning truly is long-range because once you build something, it's there.
And the big thing is a lot of what we're doing. I mean, I think of Bear Tracks, for example, the bridge. The multimodal part of this is part of the plans. I mean, when you do something, you change a street, you do a thing. That's just part of the orders now.
So we have a couple of things that drive that. We have our mode split goals, which is to triple the number of people biking, walking, taking transit, carpooling, working from home over the time frame of the plan. So that's over a couple decades. We also have our complete streets policy, and that tells us that when we do any major maintenance or reconstruction on a street, we prioritize users. And we prioritize pedestrians, people in wheelchairs with limited mobility. We prioritize emergency vehicles. We prioritize, putting in street trees or street furniture like benches and things like that, sidewalks. So we try to build back a street that has something for everyone, and that's part of that. Complete streets policy.
And that's what we're looking at with Midtown. Might be a real example of that, because the Brooks reconstruction and those kinds of plans are all incorporating that type of approach, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And as you do that and put those kinds of plans together, how much of it is really checking with stakeholders, so that the bike community is happy, so the walkers are happy, so the cars are happy, so the police department's happy.
Yeah.
How do you, is that where this policy sort of informs that and brings some of that all together?
Yeah, I mean, I think public involvement in transportation infrastructure is it's part of the environmental process. It's part of all of our design processes. So you remember all the meetings about Russell Street. I mean, that was there's a lot of public process, and I would not put that on a pedestal as a good public process, Russell Street in particular. But
I don't know though, Jordan. I mean, you look at where we were at. I ran across some old footage the other day. Not that old really, but I mean, you look at 2008, 9, 10, all the discussions, and you look at the change in that, and including things like bike lanes and transit opportunities and, better sidewalks. And I mean, there's just, that's huge, really.
Yeah. No, and I mean, the outcome's good. It's more the process. Russell Street took an awful long time and a lot of hand wringing, but I think, but now we have a much more collaborative relationship with the State Department of Transportation. We have much more cohesive policies and much more robust and much more effective engagement strategies, I'd say, than we had a couple decades ago.
And that the planning. So if the city has these climate objectives, these climate lenses, as you call them, How do you then interface with Missoula County or with the long range transportation planning group? How do you reach out and make sure they're part of those discussions and part of those objectives?
So the Missoula County has, Lee has colleagues at the Missoula County that do similar work. The commissioners and I, meet frequently about a number of things, but climate and sustainability and resiliency are chief among those. And then in transportation in particular, our long-range transportation plan is stewarded by a group called the Metropolitan Planning Organization, which is kind of a multi-governmental body of city, county, state, mountain line, and health board, and planning board, I guess, as well. Those lenses are infused into that work through informal collaboration, but also through more formalized processes like the long-range transportation plan.
And that's kind of been there for a while. I can recall going to meetings over the years, and every time there was a discussion about a project or a grant or something coming up, always seemed like part of the discussion focused on, multimodal, or how do we change, recycle materials from a road we're tearing up, those kinds of things, right? Yeah. Let's talk about this renewable rate option, because I know that's something that's in the budget. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so this is probably the single biggest thing we can do to actually move the needle on climate locally. So this is a project to develop utility scale new renewable power generation. So we're working through the city of Bozeman, with the city of Bozeman rather, and with Missoula County, and we're working on negotiating with Northwestern Energy to create basically a new renewable power option that would be available to local governments. So to the city and county and city of Bozeman could buy this green power, but it would also be available to residents and businesses. So the residents and businesses could opt in and purchase this power. And so this is sometimes it's called a green tariff. Tariff is the utility lingo for a billing structure essentially, but or for a utility rate. But it's basically would be an option where someone could opt into having this new renewable source of power. We've been working with Northwestern and with those other jurisdictions for several years, and it's been productive. We're making progress. It's still a heavy lift, and it still relies on the utility being a partner, and but we are making progress. And
so let me understand, and Lee, jump in, or anybody else raise their hand that needs to explain something here. I'm aware of carbon tax credits and all those kinds of things. So mechanically, how does this work? Is it us opting to buy green sourced power?
Yeah. So it is actually carbon credits or
it's a different thing, but it's
renewable energy credits or even any kind of offsets. Those are more accounting mechanisms.
Yeah.
And this would be actually that there would be new power that was built. So rather than just buying existing green power and letting the not green power go somewhere else, this would be the creation of new renewables, and that power would be dedicated to the city and county. And it might not be in real time, where your power is coming from at the moment. Might not be from this wind farm or solar farm, but it would be new power that would be into the system. So it would actually move the needle. Versus some of those more accounting tools are really about shifting.
Yeah, it's just not really a shell game, but it's an accounting thing.
Yeah. I don't think it would be disingenuous to call it a shell game. I think some of those really are more.
So in this case, you could, if Northwestern were to play ball on this, Bozeman, Missoula County, anybody else, other jurisdictions, would then be able to say, look, we're interested in working with you to develop these green sources, these green sources. Then we, in turn, would commit to purchase back those green sources, right? And how does that work with the renewable type credit then?
Yeah, so basically then, and so right now our electricity profile is about 59% renewable or green, and that's primarily hydro. I mean we have a much more renewable or a much cleaner energy source in Missoula or in Montana than most of the country as it stands, just because we rely so heavily on hydro. But that 42% is primarily coal and gas, and so this new generating capacity would step in and fill that void, essentially, or fill that area. So it would be an option, as it would be the PSC, the Public Service Commission, who approves utility rates, would approve this as an option, and you could opt into it as a power.
Would we save money by going for that rate?
I think that
in the long run,
there's definitely in the long run. There's different schools of thought as to whether or not it would be an immediate savings. With a lot of the tax incentives in the Inflation Reduction Act, it very well could be. But a lot of that has to do with the scale, and a lot of that has to do with getting the scale large enough so that it provides enough power to not only meet those municipality needs, but to meet larger scale consumers. There's some strange bedfellows in this. Walmart is one where they have corporate goals of clean power, and they might be interested. Or there's a lot of entities like that have some skin in the game and could be partners. Also, as a when our power was deregulated and then partially re-regulated,
right.
and one of the things when the re-regulation occurred was there was a major power consumers could opt in to. They could opt back into the Northwestern portfolio or the whatever, or they could remain on the open market and purchase their power. The city of Missoula elected to opt back in. The city of Great Falls did not. So the city of Great Falls has choice right now as far as where they purchase their power from. So there's some major consumers. I want to say there's 50 to 100 of them around the state that are large-scale power users. MSU opted out. UM opted back in. So UM is locked into the Northwestern regulated utility. MSU can buy power on the open market and through Northwestern's distribution.
Which is always fascinating to me to watch. There's so many different models of power in the Northwest. It's very interesting to see that. Mm-hmm. So the idea with this, just to recap, would be to send a message to Northwestern, basically say Missoula, Bozeman, Missoula County, and others to be named later, hopefully, are sending a message that we're interested in buying green power. Yeah. What can we do to facilitate that? We will buy the power. Mm-hmm. We'll work on this negotiated rate, but at the same time, what can we do? Maybe it's using some of those Inflation Reduction Act funds or whatever pot of money that is.
Yeah. So the message has been sent, and we're in the process of negotiating essentially a set of terms that would could go to the Public Service Commission, and it's been a long road, but we're making progress, and we have this 100% clean electricity goal by 2030, and this is a big piece of it.
A couple other moments here before we wrap up Wednesdays with the mayor. A fascinating discussion about it's a wide-ranging thing, but like you said, when you have 100 plans in the city, that's a lot of territory that could be involved in this. What excites you the most, Jordan, about having this type of an approach, whether it's 0 by 50, renewable rates, as we just talked about, transportation planning, the ability to retrofit buildings, work with businesses, encourage individuals? What to you is the most exciting piece of this whole thing?
Missoula is a place that really just fundamentally cares about people and place, and so we're interested in innovating. We're interested in taking care of each other. We're interested in taking care of our natural environment, and all of those things make this work really fun and rewarding and impactful, I think, and that's the thing that's most exciting. And we're able to have some real successes in that too. So we, in my budget that council passed last week, we have or not last week, felt like last week. It was 2 nights ago.
2 nights ago. Yeah.
There's a new position in that, and that's an electrification specialist. And so that person will essentially be bringing in grant funds from the infrastructure bill and from the Inflation Reduction Act to basically bring in federal funds to assist with our clean energy transition. And the great thing about that position is it doesn't have a tax impact. We're funding it through some non-tax sources, through some federal funding sources. and then it'll eventually pay for itself because it'll be paid for off the indirect costs of the federal grants. So we can do things like that where we really innovate around how we approach these programs, and so there's we've got a lot of tools in the toolbox and a lot of will to get it done, I guess.
I have to ask you too, because of course this issue has been, bandied about in a lot of different ways over the years, even changing, from climate change to, climate warming. How do you convince the skeptics out there, or the people who say, this is a big global thing I can't do anything about, or the person who says this is just a temporary thing? How do you reach out and reach across and get those people to sort of buy in and do what they can, whatever they feel like?
Yeah. It's interesting. I have a friend who works in agriculture, and he said it's been really interesting to see these kind of conservative farmers come along where they're the biggest evangelists now for climate change that there are, because they're seeing the on the ground impacts to their crops, and I think all that's a matter of time, and we need to run pretty fast in terms of a lot of our climate work, and so I think, to me, it's almost more about we need to do this work where we can do it. And then folks will come along. But it's really about that. I think that it's unfortunate that climate has become so polarized as a political issue. It used to be, back with the greenhouse gas effect in the 80s, when that was first studied. It was, there was some climate legislation. It wasn't called that at the time, but that teetered on being adopted by George H.W. or signed into law by George H.W. Bush, and so it never used to be politicized. Science never used to be politicized.
Yeah, it's kind of gotten that way.
Yeah.
Do you hope that people would find something in there, in that broad menu that we've talked about tonight, that they can say, I could get on board with that? Whether it's maybe a solar panel to save some money, whether it's improving their HEPA filter, so they don't breathe the fire smoke. If it's maybe planting a few more trees to support the urban forestry program, do you kind of hope that people might be able to find their niche, something that they're interested in that they can make a difference?
Absolutely, and I think one of the city's roles is to connect people to resources. So we can connect people to resources for electrification. We can connect them to resources for urban forestry, and that's the city is a service provider, and that's one of the services that we can help provide, is just connecting people to the resources they need to make it easy. We had a great program like that called Solarize Missoula some years back that was built to make it really easy for you to add solar to your home.
I remember that. Yeah.
And you basically raised your hand and you said, I want solar, and someone the city had some contractors lined up and some solar installers and some financing institutions, and they came out, and someone came out and did an assessment, and you basically they took care of all the headache for you, and this is what it's going to cost you to get solar. Do you want it, yes or no? And it was really an easy entry point into what's a little bit more of a challenging thing to do. Kind of tell you what questions to ask and all of that, and so I think we can do things like that, or through the Electrify program that Lee mentioned with the heat pump water heater rebates. So that's through federal money. We're helping connect people to federal money to get rebates for replacing their water heater with something more efficient. And so it's no city money. It's really us being a connector and a facilitator, which is what we do best.
I should make one final look around the room. Anybody have questions or anything you want to throw in? Okay, good. I got so absorbed.
Yes, I do.
Oh, stand up here. I'm sorry, I got so absorbed in the conversation here, I missed the opportunity. So, yeah, go ahead and stand up.
I do want to thank you for the work that you're doing. I think you're on the right track. My specific issue is the railroad horn crossing. Talk about climate, noise pollution affecting hundreds of people 24/7. I'm sorry, you're a little close. What I understand about the wayside horn that's supposed to be installed. Talk to your secretary. It's been over 5 years in the planning, 2 years since they tested it. I know the Montana Rail Link being sold to Burlington has now changed the priorities of installing that horn. Give me some take on your assessment. the plans that you, and can this be a campaign issue? I think it should be.
It's a big issue regardless of where it comes, I guess, and it's a good question. And so the Wayside Horn, when the project was in limbo basically for a period of time from when the sale of, or when MRL terminating their lease was announced, and that there was a limbo period where neither railroad was really willing or interested in making a decision on whether or not they would allow, and so let me back up, I guess. So the Greeno crossing, the Madison Street crossing has never been an issue in terms of whether or not it's okay to go. It's MRL and BNSF both will honor the Wayside Horn project because they're governed under the Federal Railroad Administration's quiet zone regulations. The crossing in question is the Taylor Street crossing, which is the old GW Petroleum down by Lemon Laundry and Drum Coffee and across from Thunderbird Hotel, and that's a private crossing because that Taylor Street was vacated when the I-90 went through decades ago, and so that's been a private crossing ever since. And MRL and BNSF treat private crossings differently. So there aren't federal regulations about whether or not they have to blow a horn or whether or not they can be absolved of blowing a horn with something like a Wayside Horn. So it is completely discretionary for BNSF to say, okay, we will blow our horn here or we won't. What's changed is that MRL had provided assurances that they wouldn't sound the horn at Taylor Street. BNSF has revoked those and said that we will sound our horn here. So there's and I'd be happy to sit down and visit in greater detail. Basically there's three paths forward with Taylor Street, and the operating theory. And I met with several Lower Rattlesnake residents last week, and that my operating assumption was challenged by them, and I'd like to get your take on it too. But the operating theory had been that if you have the Taylor Street crossings, particularly with an eastbound train, it's the same sound profile as it is at Van Buren or at Madison rather. So do you really get an impact if you can't do them both? Now your neighbors said yes, you do. You get a reduction in train horns, and that's a benefit. My operating theory had been if you get a 50% reduction in train horns, and you probably get a 5% reduction in irritation was my theory. But the ongoing question is how to deal with Taylor Street, and we could go into the weeds on what the options are.
I believe it's Montana Railway property. Just went down there and talked to Jimmy, the owner of the Thunder.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
And he did one.
Sounds like an issue to dig into a little bit further.
Yeah.
The other point is to make it a complete quiet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now that 2nd Street is shut off,
Mm-hmm.
I talked to Mayor Ingram about 11 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
and he explained how, you have the configuration of those streets makes it difficult to close it all up.
Mm-hmm.
Stopping 2nd Street would, I believe, help that to make it a quiet zone completely.
Yeah.
Taylor Street, again, being a private, Jimmy said when the understanding was when that gate was closed, they should not blow the horn.
Yeah.
Do it.
Well, and BNSF has changed. They have a different. They're not willing to honor that. They basically have a different operating protocol. But
I did talk to Chester.
Okay.
Money in the infrastructure, Inflation Reduction Act, $25 million for the city.
Yeah.
Perhaps you could install barriers to make it a quiet zone.
And there's a program in the infrastructure law called it's in the infrastructure law, and then there's 1 year of it in the Inflation Reduction Act, and it's called the Reconnecting Communities program, and it's all about crossing eliminations, and so it's all about eliminating crossings that are creating issues in communities. And so one of the things that we're pursuing too is can we just eliminate? I mean, there's not very much behind that Taylor Street crossing. There's the petroleum office, and there's the railroad has a couple offices back there. Can we just get some federal money just to relocate them and just close that crossing altogether? And so that's an approach as well.
There's a lot of changes that'll be taking place. I mean, MRL just took out some more of the major crossings in the Bitterroot this week. They're gone. And so a lot of those things are starting to change as part of that transition. So, well, thank you for your question.
Yeah, let's visit afterward and go through.
Final question before we wrap up, Mayor. So where do people go? And this is the handoff for Lee, perhaps, but to find out. I mean, if they want to get more involved in any aspect of this climate initiative, where's the starting point for that?
Yeah. Well, we have our engagement website is engagemissoula.com, and there's great information on there, and that's a really good start. And then Climate Smart actually is our partner in this work, and they've got great information on their website. And then Electrify Missoula is electrifymissoula.com, electrifymissoula.com, and that's got great information on the home scale. Like I want to do electrification at my home.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of aspects to it, and it's a big thing to get your mind and your arms around. But there are many, many details, and like I said earlier, I'm sure there's probably places that people can, find a favorite, project that they can do to make a difference, or support a project that makes a difference. So yeah, very fascinating. Oh, one more question. Okay. Uh-huh. That's a very good observation. And I know Dr. Running, I've talked to him about that, and we've talked about that's one of the messages he cites all the time. He said, whether you want it to be, you can debate the politics of it, it still makes sense. I mean, he always uses the example of LED lights. He said that's one of the, and I totally agree with him, is one of the, people think it's, well, the greatest technology of the last few years is the iPhone. Well, not really. It really is LED lights. I mean, it's fascinating to see, and he's talked about that. So, yeah. Let me get a mic on you. I don't think people can hear you.
One of the best things that people can do on an individual basis is plant a home garden. Mm-hmm. It makes a huge difference in the environment.
It does, yeah. And we have, I think that's one of the things that's great about, some of the programs we have locally is that we have there's so many different things that people can do, and we've got this program through the city that's in support of National Wildlife Federation gardening for pollinators, and creating monarch butterfly friendly gardens and creating pollinator friendly gardens. And I mean, there's so many things you can do, like growing a vegetable garden or growing a pollinator garden or planting street trees, and it's just one of the things that's really refreshing is just that the community is so interested collectively in taking those steps.
There's a lot of steps to take, and Jordan, we appreciate your time. This has been fascinating. A very big topic when you think about trying to discuss it in a little over an hour. So we encourage folks to go to engagemissoula.com, contact some of the agencies we've talked about tonight, and find a way to make a difference and get involved in this program. Thanks for joining us tonight, Mayor. Thank you, and thank you for joining us for Wednesdays with the Mayor.